Welcome back to the second and final part of my PLL Parity mini-series. Before I start showing you all of my solutions, I'm going to go over the recognition and names of all of the cases for ease of communication. These are the most basic cases to recognize and solve. This case is an opposite edge swap, which we refer to as OP for short. And this is an adjacent edge swap, which we refer to as ADJ for short. This next case is another EPLL, which has all four edges unsolved and has two opposites here. This is called a W perm. The final EPLLs are the O perms. There are two of them, and what distinguishes them from the W perms, since they also have four edges unsolved, is that there's no opposites anywhere. In fact, the way the edges cycle is that they go around in a circle. This O perm, right here, goes the opposite direction. Next up are the basic corner swaps. Here we have an adjacent corner swap, which we refer to as PJ with a lowercase p. This is short for Parity J, and it's a name that's derived from square one solving. So if you don't do a lot of square one, don't worry if the name doesn't make a ton of sense. There are a couple other names for it, but PJ is the most concise and unambiguous, so that's what I prefer. Similarly, this diagonal corner swap right here is referred to as PN, short for Parity N. Next up, these are P-perms. They both have a 1x3 line, like this, as well as a 2x2 square. They're very easy to recognize due to the large amount of blocks. These are S-perms. You may laugh now. They have no headlights, so they're diag corner swap cases, and they have these two 1x2 blocks, just like this. Aside from PN, these are the only diag corner parity cases that have any blocks on them. These are K-perms. They have a similar block structure to the S-perm with these two 1x2 blocks, but in addition, they have headlights that are fully separated from those blocks. These are D-perms. They look a little bit like K-perms, having these two 1x2 blocks as well as headlights. But the key difference is that this block is attached to these headlights like this, and they create this sort of R-perm block. Similarly here, we have the two pairs and the headlights with the R-perm block. If we look at a K-perm once again, you can see that there's no such R-perm block, and the blocks and headlights are completely disjointed. These are B-perms. Like D-perms, they have this R-perm block as well as another pair, but on these, the two 1x2 blocks are separated from one another. Similarly here, we have R-perm block and another 1x2 that is separated from this 1x2. Compare this to a D-perm where we have the R-perm block and attached pairs. Before we continue, I want to make a quick note that B-perms and D-perms are inverses of one another. For example, this B-perm is the inverse of this D-perm. That concludes all of the cases with blocks on them. So now we have three separate cases that all have headlights with no other blocks. To begin telling them apart, first look at the edge between the headlights. If it's opposite, this means you have M-perm. If it's an adjacent color here, you have a C-perm, but to tell which C-perm you have, you can look at this front color and compare it to this corner on the right, the FUR sticker. So here we have an opposite color, and here we have another adjacent color. While this recognition method might seem overly angle dependent, I'll show you how you can use that to your advantage in the execution section of this video. And here are the final two cases. These both have no blocks and no headlights on them. So to tell them apart, look at one corner and its two surrounding edges. If there are two total colors, in this case we have just red and green, this is an X-perm. If we have four total colors, like in this case, this is a Q-perm. If you have no blocks and no headlights, and you look around a corner like this and see three total colors, that means you have an E-perm, so you can go ahead and solve that like you normally would. Alright, now let's move on to the actual solutions, starting with OP. You should already know this one. If you don't already know it, this video isn't for you. but I just made a video on the solution that I use for this that is slightly different from the standard, so go check that out if you haven't already. Next, for edge, what we do here is we simply set up these edges to op by doing a sexy move. So now they're right here. We can do op and then undo setup. This highlights one quirk of the op algorithm that you should be familiar with already, but if not, you'll notice that the algorithm performs a U2. So instead of doing sexy move, op, and then directly inverse sexy, we have to put that U2 in there as well, so it becomes U prime R, U prime R prime. So in total, sexy move, op, U prime R, U prime R prime. Or some variation of that. You can experiment and try and find something that works better for you if that isn't ideal for your solving style. From here on out, most of the solutions will consist of op followed by some non-parity PLL, but in certain cases, one solution will be vastly better than another. So I'll show you the solutions that I think are better. Of course, feel free to experiment and find ones that work for you. So for W perm, you can do op into some U perm. This one happens to begin with R2, which cancels with the R2 slice. That ends my PLL parity algorithm. So we can solve like that. If I undo, we can cancel that like so. However, I take a slightly different approach to W perm, and what I do instead is I hold it from the same angle with the opposites in the front right, but I cancel into the MU U perm right here. So what that looks like is L2 slice. Done faster, it looks like this. For O perms, some people will do a unique solution where they do this C-shape OLL, followed by op, followed by F inverse sexy F prime. The solution that I prefer, however, is much more similar to my W perm solution. What I do essentially is op canceled into a Z perm. So you remember how M2 cancels with R2 slice to become L2 slice? Well, we do the same thing. Cancel into the Z perm. For this O perm, which goes the opposite direction, we simply do U primes instead of U's in the Z perm. To recognize which direction we do the U moves within the Z perm, take a look at this front edge right here. It belongs between these orange corners, and we do a U to put it there, so we do U moves within the algorithm, like so. Likewise, we need to do a U prime to put this edge where it needs to go, so we do U prime within the algorithm. PJ is an example of a case that has a lot of flexibility with how you can solve it. Pretty much all of the good solutions involve op and T perm in some order, but you can do this from many different angles. For example, if they're swapping on right, you can start with T perm and get op out of that. If you get the swap in front or back, you can do op from there and then AUF into a T perm. If the swap is on left, the best thing to do is usually just to AUF into some other execution, since to execute it directly from that angle, you would need to do something like lefty T perm. There's also an algorithm that directly solves PJ, but it's less flexible and I also think slower than doing op plus T perm in some order. PN is an interesting case because it has multiple decent solutions, but neither of them involve doing op into some PLL. The reason for this is that no matter what angle you do op from, you receive an N perm. So instead what a lot of people do is the first half of a Y perm, then swap the left and right edges by doing U prime or U into op. I would personally do U prime, and then finish the Y perm. This is decent, but there's a solution that I think is a lot better. My preferred solution comes in the form of a direct algorithm. So what this algorithm is, essentially, is it starts with a T perm where the first two R moves are slices, like that. The rest are wide moves. Then you do a sexy move, then a block comm to solve the rest. Faster, it looks like this. I think this solution is better than the Y-perm based one, but like always, it's good to experiment and figure out what works for you. For P-perms, I like to hold the 2x2 square in the front with the line on the side, like this. If the line ends up on the right, like this, you can do op into JB perm. If you want to, there's a slight cancellation you can do between the two algs. We have R2 slice and R. And one way you can do this is to do just a single R slice and then a wide R move and continue with the J perm. This won't be good for absolutely everyone, but I thought it was worth pointing out since I do this in my solves and I find it faster. For the other P perm, where we have the bar on the left, do JB perm from here, and then you get opposite out of it. For K perms, you can hold the headlights on the left for both cases, do op, and get A perm out of it. By holding the headlights on the left, you'll force a case that starts with an R2, so that way you can cancel with a wide R2. So in this case, where the blocks are in front, you do this A perm from the front like that. And for this case, where the blocks are in the back, you do the A perm from the back. Like this. For AUF, this front edge will always stay where it is in both cases. So we're going to have red on front, so we'll do a U prime at the end of this one. Like that. And here we have orange in front, so we'll do a U at the end. Like so. With D perms, there's not really much in the way of canceling. So what I do instead, for this case, you can see how this block, if this were a full block, this would be like a JB perm. So we do a JB perm here, and then go into op. For the mirror, you could use any of several good JA algs into op, but what I do, and most people aren't going to like this very much, I do lefty JB into the lefty version of my PLL parity. If you prefer to do something different, like this algorithm into op, or perhaps that algorithm into op, those solutions are fine as well. This is just a case where personal preference is a very strong factor in deciding which algorithm to use. For this B perm right here, which has the same sort of fake JB block as that first D perm that I showed, the idea is that we're going to be doing op here into JB. So you can hold it either here or from its U2 angle. This is my preferred angle, but both are completely fine since we're just going to be doing op and then some U move into JB perm. For this case, rather than going into JA perm, I hold the headlights on left, do most of a T perm. So we're 5 moves away from the end, like that. But from here, we do op and finish. For S perms, I want to introduce a concept called angle consistency. Essentially, we'll be holding these at similar angles so that we can do a little bit less recognition, and then once we get to this recognition angle, we can fully recognize the case and then execute from there. So in the case of S perms, we're going to hold the blocks at the front and right, just like this. And in both of these cases, we're just going to do a Y perm, and it's going to lead us to op. The only difference is that here, the op will be between UF and UB, so we don't have to AUF, and here it'll be between UL and UR, so we do have to AUF. So one way you can recognize this is that Y perm preserves this block right here. So we see that this op is going to be in the front, and we can go straight into it. And here we see this is solid, so we'll have to do either a U or U prime into op. We can use this concept of angle consistency to our full advantage to solve M and C perms. So for all of these cases, we'll hold the headlights on the right, and you'll look at the edge between the headlights. If it's opposite, you have an M perm, so you can go ahead and solve that with op straight into T perm, and we can do a semi-cancel in the same way that we did for the first P perm that I showed, like so. and that solves it. Similar to PJ, M has a lot of flexibility in how you can solve it, but I find that it's worth it to sacrifice that flexibility in order to gain an advantage in recognition. For the C perms, once you see that you have an adjacent color between the headlights, look at the FU edge compared to the FUR corner. In this case, we have adjacent colors, and in this case, we have opposite colors. If we have adjacent colors, we can do op here into RB perm from this angle. And if you don't know this RB perm algorithm, I would highly recommend learning it. It's the inverse of the normal RUF algorithm, and it goes like this. The full C perm with the cancellation looks like this. And for this case where we have the opposite colors here, we'll do op from this angle, and we get RA perm, and you can use your RA perm of choice here. I do RUD personally. We can again cancel between these algorithms, even though the RA perm only starts with an R. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to use my right pinky right here to do an R slice, while I simultaneously do an R wide. So it looks like that. Again, if you're not comfortable with this, don't worry about it. You can either do that or simply forgo the cancel altogether. But the full algorithm looks like this. If you plan to use the RUF RA perm, I would not recommend using that finger trick for the reason that it just doesn't leave you with a free finger in the same way that you would have for the U prime. You can't do a U as easily. You could push like this, but I think in that case it's just better to separate the R slice and R wide like that. For X perm, what we're going to do is op into E perm. And similar to what I just showed for that C perm, we can do a cancellation using this finger trick with my right pinky, like that. A little bit faster, it looks like this. And finally, for Q perm, one thing that a lot of people choose to do is very similar to the first PN solution I showed, where you do half of a Y perm, swap the UF and UB edges, and finish off the Y perm. However, I think most people greatly overestimate how fast this is. Personally, I find it much faster just to do op, U, E perm. Try both for yourself in order to get a concrete answer, but I'm willing to bet that most of you are going to find the E perm solution much better than the Y perm solution.